What an interesting book in the Old Testament. 100 years after the Babylonian captivity, we find this book. It's a period of time. Nehemiah has been in captivity. He has returned. Ezra is still in captivity, and he will return later. The people that we read about are Jews. Well, Persia and Jews. The Jews that remain in captivity after Nehemiah and then later Ezra will come. I've always heard that the Israelites lost their identity while they were in captivity. That might be true of the Assyrians. But here we see they have an identity. They know who they are. And they're in a great dilemma here. There is one named Haman. The central characters in this book are the king of Persia and his Ahasuerus, verse 1. Another name he goes by is Xerxes. That's the historical general name of this king of Persia. Then there's Mordecai and Haman and, of course, Esther and Vashti. The key verse is chapter 4, verse 13 and 14. Sermons have been made about Esther. Mordecai is commanding Esther. Now, how are they related? Mordecai's, I can't remember if it's either his brother or his sister's daughter. I think it's his brother's daughter. And her parents are dead, and he's adopting, yes.
Oh, mine has a little part before the chapter starts, and it says that Mordecai is her cousin.
Yeah, they're cousins, and I was trying to get it.
Oh.
Which
Okay.
Was it a brother or a sister that had Esther? But yes, they're cousins. But he's older. And because she's an orphan, he adopts her as a daughter. And even though they're related as cousins, he raises her. And you can tell his influence upon her and how she listens to him. He warns her, don't let them know you are Jewish when she enters into the king's, let's just say it, harem. But notice what he says in verse 13. Chapter 4, verse 13 and 14. Then Mordecai commanded to answer Esther, think not with thyself that thou shalt escape in the king's house more than all the Jews. Well, escape what? Well, they find out that there's a plot to kill all the Jews there in the country. Haman despises the Jews. He hates them. And he hates what they represent. And when they discover the plot, Mordecai says, Esther, don't escape just because, don't think you're going to escape this death that's going to take place with all the Jews just because you're in the king's house. Then he says in verse 14, for if thou altogether hold thy peace at this time, then shall there enlargement and deliverance arise to the Jews from another place. but thou and thy father's house shall be destroyed. And who knows whether thou art come to the kingdom for such a time as this. Do we as Christians believe in destiny? Do you have a destiny? What's the future hold for you? Are you going to leave it to just chance or good luck? What? What is our true destiny? Okay, when we think of destiny, we're thinking about future and the results of what's going to happen with my choices today. Where will it lead? Now, we don't believe in destiny in that it's going to be something that happens without our effort, without our purpose. You know, destiny, you can make right choices and succeed. You can make wrong choices and it leads to the consequences. You fail, you lose. If you choose to live worldly, what are you going to miss? Heaven. If you choose to live for a spiritual life and live for Christ, we have the promise of heaven. Is it destiny that Esther comes to this place at this right time?
Well, this
Yes.
reminds me of the comment that Joseph made with brothers of God saying there to preserve life. God's providence that she was there at that time.
I agree. I think it's the providence of God that she's here. Mordecai's here. When Haman is raised up, promoted, whatever it's called, and he tells the Jews, or all the people, you bow down to me. It's like during the time of Nebuchadnezzar and the three Jewish boys, young men, Nadab.
Shadrach, Meshach, and
That's it. I couldn't get it going. That what were they told to do? Worship the image, the gold, the image that was put in place by the king. And they said, no, we can't worship. Well, if you don't bow down and do that, we're going to throw you in the hot furnace. Yes.
one thing you were talking about, Jennifer, about Joseph, and him feeling like it was the providence of God, and then Mordecai saying the same thing to Esther. But they didn't know that before, right? So they felt like once they were in that position, that then they realized that maybe God had put them there for a reason, that they had a responsibility to do it the right way like God would. Right?
So you're saying they suffered, but they stayed faithful, and they came to that point in understanding God's working in my life.
Yeah, but like destiny, I think we think of it like, okay, I know this is going to happen in my life, that's going to happen next, this is going to happen next, and it's not like that. But whenever you're put in a position to do something good for the kingdom, then, in this case, they realize that.
When will we come to that point of understanding? When will that come most likely? After years of service, years of faithfulness, you mature in your faith and understanding why things happened. What's hindsight?
2020.
2020. I can look back and say, oh, look what happened when I made this choice or when I made a better choice. Now, we don't like the word destiny, spiritually. We like the word providence. We like God working Romans 8:28. Things will work out good for those that love the Lord. Now, does that mean we're not going to hurt or suffer or be persecuted? No. But in the ultimate end, the good is our salvation. And so where does this fit in? Between chapter 6 and chapter 7 of Nehemiah is what I've been told. Is where this time span is involved in Mordecai and Esther and so forth. Something that stood out in my mind is here in old Texas culture, what they do with bank robbers, murderers, horse thieves, what they do to them. Hung them. There's a gallows here in this book. Haman plans to hang Mordecai. And whether it's ironic or whether it's, are we to be happy with anybody's misfortune?
That's the best part of the story. The bad guy gets it.
Yeah, Haman gets his, doesn't he? And you almost say, ha ha, you shouldn't have done what you did, trying to connive and plan this evil against God's people. But it turns on them. Be careful with your attitude, If our enemy suffers, what are we supposed to do? Try to help him. Pray for him. Don't sit back and say, I'm so glad that happened to you. But anyway.
Or not help them when you
can. That's right.
So that would be wrong for us.
Or if something happens to them and their reputation is questioned, if you know they're not guilty of whatever it is, if you don't stand up and speak in their behalf and defend them, that'd be hard to do. Especially when that man or woman has been unkind to you or attacked you, or maybe he hurt your reputation. We ultimately, in all this, should do right by people. Is it easy? No. So God's providence, what is it? Someone defined it. It is the preservation, the care, and government which God exercises over all things that he created in order that they accomplish the ends of what God wants. Our purpose is what? To give God the glory in all things, to do things as he purposes. We can't change it. Revelation 22. We can't take away. We can't add to God's will. So, the story of Esther. Chapter 1, we see the army, Ahasuerus. They've gone and they've conquered all of Asia. How far does his reign exist? It tells us from India all the way to Ethiopia. In your mind, get that map. India, Pakistan. Afghanistan. Pakistan's right next to them, but coming this way, Iran, Iraq. Down through Egypt, Somalia, and then Ethiopia. That's a pretty big area, isn't it? That's how vast he has authority over. And so they've come and conquered, and now he's putting on the dog. We're going to celebrate. They have a week of it. Notice in verse 10, on the seventh day. Well, earlier it says, okay, when all these men come together, we have all the wine and drink and all the feast. Don't control it. Let them have it. There's no rules. And it's a drunken party. Okay? And on the seventh day, he's probably had too much to drink, hadn't had enough to eat. He's not thinking right. I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to bring my wife, Vashti, and I'm going to let her parade in front of all these men. Well, shame on him for wanting to do that. Now, she's a beautiful woman. Is it that he just wants them to see the beauty in her appearance or more? There's been accusations. If that's the case, that she's going to be dancing like a belly dancer and, immodestly do it in front of, that might be some of the objection that she has. And she refuses him. Oh, does this stir up the men of that nation? How dare that wife say no to her husband? And if this news spreads, all the women, all the wives are going to stand in rebellion against the authority of the man. Notice the last verse of chapter 1. For he sent letters into all the king's provinces, into every province according to the writing thereof, and to every people after their language, that every man should bear rule in his own house, and that it should be published according to the language of the people. So they're trying to prevent this uprising of women rebelling against the authority of men. You don't have the right to tell me what to do with my body. You don't have the right to. I'm not your slave. I can hear it all. Verse 17. For this deed of the queen shall come abroad unto all women, so that they shall despise their husbands in their eyes, when it shall be reported the king Ahasuerus commanded Vashti the queen to be brought in before him, and she came not.
Good for the women.
Good for the women. Or good for the men?
Good for the women.
Good for what?
Good for the women. They don't need to be doing that stuff.
Hey, let's appreciate Vashti. Of her purity, of her integrity, of her willingness to say, you know what, I'm not going to do that.
She knew it was,
Remember women's lib?
she knew it was wrong, and she wasn't going to do it.
She knew it was wrong, and she said no. That took courage, didn't it? What could have happened to her? Killed. He could have just put her to death. But he didn't. He just found another queen. Let's put it that way. Now, this is an evil nation. What are all these virgins and Vashti and Esther? What are they part of? A harem? Is there anything indiscreet with Esther?
She didn't have a choice.
Well,
What's a harem?
Mordecai, what?
What's a harem?
A harem?
Yeah.
That is a man's group of women. He has a choice, one every night.
Oh.
These women were gathered together for the king to choose the new queen.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I don't think it's something like what we kind of put in our mind. Now, who brings Esther to the palace?
Mordecai.
Mordecai. Doesn't he?
I don't know.
Yeah, yeah. Well, we had to go to chapter 2 to find that
I think, yeah, let's go find out.
out.
The king appointed overseers, verse 3 of chapter 2. They went together every beautiful young virgin.
Yes. And verse 5. Now, Shushan, the palace, that's the name of the palace, in that place, there was a certain Jew whose name was Mordecai, the son of Jair, the son of Shimei, the son of Kish, a Benjamite. Who else is a Benjamite in the New Testament?
Oh, it doesn't say that Mordecai took her. It was in verse 8 and following. In verse 8 of chapter 2, it says she was taken.
No. Verse 7. And he brought up Hadassah, that is Esther.
As his own daughter.
Oh, okay.
I thought we were talking about how she got to the palace.
I know. That's what I was thinking for a second.
Verse 8 says she was taken.
Where's 8?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Says, so it was when the king's command and decree were heard, and when many young women were gathered at Shushan, the citadel, under the authority of Haggai, that Esther also was taken to the king's palace. And to
Keeper of the women.
Yeah.
All right. I apologize. I was thinking Mordecai was instrumental in getting Esther in this place. Okay. So I'm wrong. And I probably quickly read that first part but what I read was he raised her up as a daughter. Verse 10, Esther had not showed her people nor her kindred, for Mordecai had charged her that she should not show it. Now, here's where Mordecai gave her some good advice. Do you think she would have found the position, the pleasure of the king if he knew she was Jewish?
He don't know what would happen to her. Seems like, he may have been protecting her as much as anything too by not.
Who you
instructing
talk
her.
about?
Mordecai may have been instructing Esther not to say that to protect her
Okay.
life, maybe.
So he probably knew if the king found out that she was Jew, then she'd
It
be
could be a problem.
in danger. Be a problem. Yes. Well, it tells us that Ahasuerus falls in love with her. And I believe that love overlooks eventually that she's a Jew.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter to him.
She was there 12 months.
Yes, they go through a period of cleansing, purification. It said 6 months doing something and 6 months doing something else, and then they had an appointment with the king, and he could choose which one.
Strange. Interesting.
I'm looking to make sure I haven't overlooked anything. Doesn't sound like anything through her life, any difficulty, except being in captivity. I guess that might have some effect on her. But Mordecai has been good to her and raised her right. When it does use the word concubines in verse 14, in the evening she went, and on the morrow she returned into the second house of the women to the custody of a man, the king's chamberlain, which kept the concubines, and she came in unto the king no more, except the king delighted in her, and that she was called by name.
That was how all of, that's talking about how all of these women would
Yeah.
be
Yeah.
Process.
processed.
Right. Does somebody have a different word than concubine? In
What
verse
chapter?
14.
14. Let me see. In the evening, she would go there, and in the morning, return to another part of the Aram to the care of Shaashgaz, the king eunuch, who was in charge of the concubines. She would not return to the king unless he was blessing with her from morning by her name.
All right. So your version has the word concubine.
Yeah.
How many concubines does Solomon have? And how many wives?
700 and something.
700 and wives? Too many? More than one, too many? You know. So Esther found favor in the sight of all of them. The last part of verse 15. And she became his queen in the 7th year of his reign. And he set a royal crown on her head and became queen instead of Vashti. Now Vashti is not dead. She's still, I guess, in the palace, but she's been taken out of place. And Mordecai, it says that he keeps the pacing the palace. He's wondering what's happened to Esther. He's real concerned about her, isn't he? In verse 20, Esther had not yet showed her kindred nor her people, as Mordecai had charged her, for Esther did the commandment of Mordecai, like as when she was brought up with him. So she is very obedient, understanding her need, and so forth. Verse 20, let's finish chapter 2, reading at verse 21. In those days, while Mordecai sat in the king's gate, two of the king's chamberlains, Bigthan and Teresh, of those who kept the door, were wroth, sought to lay hands on King Ahasuerus. And the thing was known to Mordecai, who told it to Esther, the queen. Esther certified the king thereof in Mordecai's name. And when inquisition was made of the matter, it was found out. Therefore, they were both hanged on a tree, and it was written in the book of Chronicles before the king. So Mordecai gets in the good graces of King Ahasuerus, and he will feel like he owes a debt of gratitude toward Mordecai, and that's going to come to play in the working of all of this. Now, in chapter 3, we find Haman being lifted up, promoted, and he gets the big head, and he seeks revenge on Mordecai because Mordecai refuses to bow before him in reverence. Notice in verse 1, chapter 3. And after these things did King Ahasuerus promote Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, and advanced him and set his seat above all the princes that were with him. And all the king's servants were in the king's gate, bowed and reverenced Haman. For the king had so commanded concerning him. But Mordecai bowed not, nor did him reverence. Well, what's the nitty gritty here? Why would a Jew not bow before a man?
Only supposed to bow before God.
Right. Not to bow before any image or false god. And if they're commanded to bow before him, it doesn't say anything about worshiping him, though, does it? But, uh, you know, that ticks Haman off, doesn't it? And then the king's servants, which were the king's gate, said unto Mordecai, why transgress thou the king's commandment? And they're not going to, some people just like to keep things stirred up, don't they? And they're going to, Mordecai, if you don't start bowing, we're going to tell on you. That's my words, and so it gets back to the king. Verse 4, now it came to pass when they spake daily unto him, and he hearkened not unto them, they told Haman to see whether Mordecai's matters would stand, for he had told them that he was a Jew. And when Haman saw that Mordecai bowed not, nor did give him reverence, then Haman was full of wrath. And he thought scorn to lay hands on Mordecai alone, for they had showed him the people of Mordecai. Wherefore Haman sought to destroy all the Jews that were throughout the whole kingdom of Ahasuerus, even the people of Mordecai.
So politics has always been a magnet for psychopaths.
Yes. Yeah.
One guy didn't bow down, so let's kill all the Jews. Yeah, that's very proportional.
Yeah. Now, what is the Purim? Notice in verse 7, in the first month, that is the month of Nisan. And I'm told that it's related to our month, March. In the 12th year of King Ahasuerus, they cast pur, that is the lot, before Haman from day to day, and from month to month to the 12th month, that is the month of Adar. Later on, because of the salvation of the Jews, historically they will begin having a feast of Purim. Pur means lot, and the word Purim signifies lots and was used by the Jews because Haman had cast lots to ascertain the most favorable day upon which to carry out his scheme to have the Jews slaughtered. And it failed. And so from then on, after Haman was hung and the Jews were saved, they celebrate the Feast of Purim. What's interesting thing about the Jews, when they observed this, they would recite certain words about this history, and every time Haman's name came up, they said, let the name of the ungodly perish. Every time they were just, in a simple way of saying, let him die, let him be cursed. Cursed be Haman. Blessed be Mordecai. Cursed be Zeresh. That's the wife of Haman. Blessed be Esther, and other exclamations during this time. And it wasn't necessarily a spiritual, holy festival than it was a civil or a patriarchal. they were patriots celebrating that. Well, let's finish chapter 3 next time by starting at verse 8.